in advance. So the data collection is linked to the data analysis method. Establishing clear quantity criteria and detailed procedures and responsibilities for data quality control. And the building on the existing robust procedure for literature review and increased solicitation and review of non-English language report and publications. Optimizing the UNSCEAR online platform and survey questionnaires to maximize participation from United Nations member states of different capacity and availability for data submission. Can I have the next slide, please? Some special recommendations for public exposure. So is this the... I believe that is the 6. Yeah, here. Improving questionnaires on nature radiation exposure. Prepare a menu to emphasize the essential data with consideration on uncertainty. Collaboration with IAEA to collect data on discharge via DIRATA, as was discussed earlier this morning, and encourage data submission on other fuel cycle facilities and facilities other than the nuclear fuel cycle. Specific data for contaminated nuclear test sites and or consumer product. Consider and accept official report in addition to publications in scientific journal. So national report or regional report is also important source of data. And target specific countries significant for exposure evaluation, especially those with large populations and in different continents. I believe I have the control now. No. Okay, it's a bit. I know above recommendations are more in the sense of general and not detailed enough, really on how to effectively improve data collection. So I will not take much of our limited time. So you will learn more from experiences of member states with data collection, especially when national database are not exist yet. In any case, we really wish to hear more from all UNSCEAR national contact persons, so on how we can effectively improve the data collection. This is the end of my presentation. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Jing, and nice to see you because we couldn't see you. We saw the presentation, but thank you very much. There was a little bit of a delay when pressing the buttons, but I think that everything went quite well, and the presentation will be shared also later on the IA conference website as well. Thank you very much for this very useful food for thought. And again, if you have any questions, please you're very welcome to use the Q&A box, which I see that you're very familiar. We were very pleased to see so many questions in the morning session. And now let me turn to the 3 member states that kindly agreed to share their experience. And I would like to invite them in alphabetical order. So we start with Brazil and Mrs. Lydia Vasconcelos, and I apologize, Lydia, for the pronunciation. So Lydia is head of the Medical Physics Division of the Institute of Radiation Protection and Dosimetry at the National Nuclear Energy Commission in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. She's also representative of Brazil to the UNSCEAR and a national contact person. So a very useful experience Lydia will share with us. Lydia holds a PhD degree in nuclear engineering and has experience in nuclear engineering, licensing and control, radioactive facilities, radioisotope applications in medicine, mainly in nuclear medicine. So Lydia, have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I hope you are hearing well. Well, let me see. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to share some experience in data collection for UNSCEAR surveys. First of all, I'd like to localize Brazil. Is the most populous in the bigger country from Latin America in size and population, but it differs from the language. We speak Portuguese, not Spanish, as a colonization result from Portugal. We have a big country. The most populous region is the southeast, and you can see here the most populous state is São Paulo, followed by Rio de Janeiro and Minas Gerais. And just to compare with Amazon, that we have only 4% of the population, and active here is the Amazon forest. We don't have much people living there. And this region it's more apart from the most developed region, that's southeast with 42% of the population, and we have a great social inequality, considering industrial, medical, or even human development. And well, the country is divided in 5 regions, 26 states, and 1 federal district is the capital and the center of the country. Well, for UNSCEAR data collection, Brazil is participating in medical exposures, occupational and public. Medical, it's closed the report, but we continue to work on medical exposure and occupational for 2021 and public for 2024. Well, the data from all regions from the country, it's a real challenge because the difference in social development and the locals that we don't have much access to the new technologies or new procedures. For occupational exposures, we have a regulatory body, I work there, in Ministry of Science, Technology, Innovation. It's the Brazilian Nuclear Energy Commission that license and control nuclear and radioactive facilities. Individual monitoring is a legal requirement. It's inside the Commission standards. And we have a national database on occupational individual monitoring. The name is GDOS. We have monthly reports from each individual dosimetry laboratories that are authorized to work in individual monitoring area. And we have also some groups of experts to investigate or to follow the investigation for some doses that above the investigation levels or action levels in an emergency like this. Well, here we put here the division more or less with the installations that we have in the country. We have 2 nuclear power plants also, uranium mining, full cycle, and norm installation. The GDOS, the result of the GDOS, we can see here that we have a medical use is the most occupational exposures that we control, 8% of the total. But we have some restriction in this system that are in place nowadays. We don't have internal dosimetry register or neutron exposures register also, despite the measures are being taken regularly, but in another system, the system is not integrated as we need. The problems are well known, the actions has been taken to solve those problems nowadays. For medical exposures, we have 2 regulatory bodies. It's difficult to talk with each other. Here from Minister of Health, we have the regulatory body ANVISA that controls diagnostic radiology. In this system, from this regulatory body, we have a unique public health system named SUS, and another system or another entity that's INS, National Health Agency, that dealing with private health insurance. They have more, they are a part of the system. The unique public system is for all of the population, and they have some control about the procedures that are made for the population. And the Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation, again, the regulatory body, Brazilian Nuclear Energy Commission, that deals with the licensing control for radiotherapy and nuclear medicine facilities. Well, if I can divide the public health system, we have the public one that's not, you have no payment to do this. It's a compulsory. Every worker has to be paid in your salary. And the private one that you pay a part, if you can, to, and the division of the population are more or less for the public system 77%, and the private one 23% for medical, and for dentists it's more, it's bigger, 92% for public and 8% for private. But the number of the procedures are not directly related because the access for the private to the new technologies or new procedures for the private system is much more than the public one. Well, about the population, we have the general information. We do census every year. In this site, we have by age, sex, and regions, we have the distribution of the population. And in the system from Minister of Health, the public health system, we have access to a database, DataSUS, where we can see the number of diagnostic procedures by age and sex, and number of the treatment procedures by age and sex. And the private system is more difficult to obtain information from the private hospitals, but you have the total number by age 1 sex. The National Health Facilities Registration, we can do a research and have the number of devices installed in all the systems. And for the staff that works in these areas, we have agreements with professional societies to obtain data. Well, to have the doses involved in each procedure, we made some data collection in the main hospitals, and these results as considered as a reference for all population. Well, we can predict some difficulties in public exposures, like the problem with the dimension of the country. And Brazilian NCP was nominated maybe in September, I believe. But we don't have much information about all regions, only for some places that we have a higher background, and we don't have, for example, for natural radiation source, a cosmic radiation, or the public exposure during aircraft flights, and about the radon, that is so important as our experts told us. We don't have a mapping. It's not considered a big problem in Brazil because of the climate. We have open houses, but we have some problems, we know, in the remote regions that use the material to construct houses. And nuclear power plants, we have an online monitoring system. I believe that will not be a big problem. And military applications, it's a great challenge to have some agreements with the military people. About the data from Goiânia accidents, the information is available. We are accompanying this accident since 1987, and the international system, like the data, in this system, the data from Brazil, I believe that all data in the system is from 2012. Well, here we have to do some cooperation agreements and must be established. It's not yet established, but we try to do it. Well, that's it. In conclusion, the survey are a challenge in a country of large dimension and so diverse realities in its region, and centralization of the information remains necessary. Thank you. Here we have my email address. If you would like to ask some questions, I'm available. Thank you. Borisova.
Thank you, Lydia. I was just waiting for you to log off and just to see you. But again, thank you very much for the comprehensive presentation. And really, for the interest of time, I would like to give the floor to Jamila Al-Suwadi. But Lydia, you're very welcome to join the panel session. So if there are any questions, please use the chat box, and then Lydia will also join the panel session. So Jamila is a consultant medical physicist at the Dubai Health Authority, the United Arab Emirates, and holds a doctoral degree of philosophy in radiation medicine. She's the national contact person of the UAE for our UNSCEAR Global Survey, and works closely with the UAE health organizations, government and private, and also with the UAE regulatory authority, the Federal Authority for Nuclear Regulations, to collect data. So Jamila, you have the floor.
Thank you for this introduction. Hello and good day to everyone. I'm thankful to the IAA and the UNSCEAR teams for giving me the chance to share with you the United Arab Emirates experience with data collection of past UNSCEAR survey. I would like to share with you here in this presentation the UAE experiences related to data collection, and I will be focusing more on the medical exposure. And also I will put some highlights on the future UAE contribution in the upcoming public exposure survey. Sorry, I cannot move to the next slide. Dubai Health Authority. Dubai Health Authority, DHA, as a UAE representative for the UNSCEAR Global Survey, worked closely with the UAE healthcare organization, the governmental and the private sectors. And we also worked with the UAE Federal Authority for Nuclear Regulation, named as FANR, to collect data on medical exposure and occupational exposure for the years shown in this slide. In order to have a good contribution, it's important to have all stakeholders and data providers well informed and involved in the survey from the beginning of the survey. We at the UAE, in order to enhance and encourage participation, we linked the UNSCEAR survey with the UAE strategic goals. So we highlighted that by joining the global survey, we actually contribute in achieving a world-class healthcare systems and also in achieving international quality of services for our patients. So we set a plan for our involvement in this global survey, and the plan was set into phases. The first phase was to recruit a research assistant to help us in collecting the data and analyzing it and communicating with the participants. The second phase was related to the radiology data collection because it's the largest expected data. So the DHA informatics team especially established an electronic questionnaire management system based on the UNSCEAR survey forms to collect the data online. The link of the QMS was distributed to all government health organization and the private, and also we distributed the user manual for the survey. The private healthcare was also approached through our regulatory body, the national one, the FANR, and the local regulatory departments, such as the DHA regulatory department. For the nuclear medicine specialty and radiotherapy specialty, because we have limited numbers, we have about 17 nuclear medicine departments and only 4 radiotherapy. So we communicated with them directly through email communication of the DHA. We organized campaigns to disseminate information related to the UNSCEAR objectives and aims of the global survey. So we distributed announcements, and also we sent official letters through the DHA Director General Office to all healthcare organizations in the UAE. FANR also contributed in the management process of the data collection and considered the UNSCEAR Global Survey as an item of agenda for the National UAE Radiation Protection Committee. So we discussed the achievement of the survey within the meetings of the National Radiation Protection Committee. We organized also, in cooperation with the Medical Education Department and FENR, an open day on UNSCEAR survey to give information to the private. So we invited private and governmental organization to this open day. When we look to the medical exposure data that we collected, we achieved 16% as an overall for the radiology exposure data collection. And this analyzed against the number of facilities registered within the licensing record of FENR for 2016, and that was about 2,300 facilities. If we look to this figure, 16% is a small figure and it's limited, but if we looked to the governmental organization that they participated in the survey, it was about 18%. For nuclear medicine, the data that we collected was about 80% for the whole UAE, and for radiotherapy data, it was 100% that we covered all the 4 radiotherapy departments within the country. The collected data for radiology were actually limited, and that's due to the limited participation of the private. And the private actually in the UAE is considered of a high ratio. It's about 75%, while the governmental patient attendance is about 25%. So that shows the limited contribution. The lessons that we learned and challenges that we faced when we went through the medical and occupational data collection is that because the data that need to be collected was huge and people or the personnel who worked on the data were limited. Also the private, as I mentioned, that they were not really willing to take part because it's time consuming and they don't have the record. Also in some governmental hospitals, they don't have a record, so they have to work on that. So that was time consuming, although that we visited some of the hospitals to show the importance of the survey. The UNSCEAR Open Day that arranged by DHA and FENR teams was a successful event, encouraged more participation. We thought that also if we want through the awareness program through TV or mass media, that would improve the contribution. Also, many people failed to understand the level of research being undertaken when this data is collected, that it will in the future help the research, not only just figures to be collected. Also, we noticed that when we followed the electronic questionnaire, the data improved. Our data team designed Excel macros to analyze the data, and that helped. Also, we noticed that coding or programming could help more because the data is huge and need of more analysis. This point is actually mentioned earlier by our colleagues, that the terminology used for the staffing was not same in all places. So it created some of contradictory figures that we have to overcome that. Here at almost the end of my presentation, I'd like to put some highlights on the upcoming UNSCEAR survey and the contribution of the UAE. UAE has the regulatory framework that will support the contribution in the public exposure. We have regulatory framework, we have regulation on existing exposure situation. And FENR, who is our nominated national contact person, will work on the data collection. They actually have the history and they have experience in working on the public exposure. FENR releases first annual report on radiological environmental monitoring in November 2018. The report established the baseline level of radiation either from natural occurring or from man-made radionuclide sources. We have a baseline established for the national radiation background, and monitoring radiation in areas around nuclear facilities also monitored, and there is a record for that, which will help a lot in the coming public exposure survey. And to end, also we have FENER and the Baraka nuclear power plant working jointly on the programs related to the radiological environment. And within the National Radiation Protection Committee, we have a working group named as National Environmental Radiological Measurements, who have the process now working on National Indoor Radon Survey, working on food and drinking water, and they have the support management for existing exposure situation, and they have the technical support, which are really promising for the coming public exposure survey that UAE will contribute in. At the end, I would like to thank you for your kind attention, and I thank my teams at the UAE and our colleagues at UNSCEAR for their guidance, support, and invitation to take part in this event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jamila. Very comprehensive presentation, and also some very interesting ideas, such as the UNSCEAR Open Day, which we might take it even further. But it's very nice to hear that UNSCEAR is reaching far to the member states, and you discuss and quite actively participate not only in the UNSCEAR sessions but also in the ad hoc working groups and also in this project. Thank you very much. So let me turn to our third presenter from a completely different scale of country and experience. So this is the United States. I want to introduce Vince Holohan, a senior level advisor for health physics within the Office of Nuclear Materials Safety and Safeguards of the United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And Vince is also a representative of the USA to the committee and a member of the ad hoc working group of sources and exposure. At the NRC, Mr. Holohan is also responsible for developing technical standards reaching federal regulation and guidance to limit occupational and public exposure to ionizing radiation. And before joining the NRC in 1996, he was a senior program officer within the US National Academies of Science. So Vince, please have the floor.
Well, thank you, Madam Chairman. For the participants in the Americas, I'd like to say good morning. To our partners in the rest of the world, good afternoon and good evening. I'd like to take a couple of moments this morning to talk about some of the experiences that we've had with data collection, primarily focusing on the experiences that we have with occupational exposure. Now, as has been mentioned already this morning, the scientific committee collects and analyzes data related to levels and trends of exposure to patients, workers, and the public. As was mentioned just a few moments ago, last week we were finalizing a report on patient exposure. We hope to finalize our report on worker exposure in June of next year. And as Michael had mentioned, the public exposure document we're hoping to finish in the 2024 timeframe. Again, the last time we had compiled a report was in our 2008 report. I believe that was published in 2010. In Annex B, we looked at both workers and members of the public in the same document. On the occupational side, we looked at 6 broad categories of practice. Those categories involved natural sources to radiation, the nuclear fuel cycle, medical uses of radiation, industrial uses of radiation, military activities, and what we described as miscellaneous. Examples of the specific categories we talked about are here. For example, under natural sources of radiation, we were looking at airline pilots and crews, coal miners, both underground and open pit mining, mineral mining, to include uranium and other precious metals, oil and gas, where we're looking at both extraction as well as scales and natural occurring materials, The fuel cycle, we looked at the entire fuel cycle there, whether it be mining, milling, enrichment, fuel fabrication. In the US, we looked at reactor operation for our PWRs and our BWRs. We looked at decommissioning, waste, as well as transportation. In medical, we look at both diagnostic and therapeutic procedures, whether they be CT procedures or nuclear medicine procedures. We also looked at such areas as dental exposures and veterinary exposures. In the industrial uses, we look at radiography, well logging, sterilization type of issues, whether it be sterilization of food products or medical supplies, radioisotope production, again, mainly for the medical sector, and accelerator operations. In total, UNSCEAR is looking at some 48 different sectors or categories of workers. I'll get this right yet. In terms of data collection, UNSCEAR is also looking for number of workers in each of these sectors and what their radiation exposure happens to be. As you can see from this panel on the bottom, we're interested in dose interval. Primarily, we'd like to know, one, total number of workers that are in a sector, and a number of occupationally exposed workers. The MDL is the minimum detectable level for radiation, and we find that that varies by country. It also varies by licensee. In many cases, if you're using electronic dosimetry, this MDL could be as low as 10 microsieverts per year. In other systems, it might be closer to 100 microsieverts per year, and some countries don't even report doses unless they exceed the public dose limit. And then we have bins, if you will, up to 1, 5, 10, all the way up to greater than 50 millisieverts in a year. But what's really important is that we have that collective dose information so we can assess what the average annual effective dose is for both the monitored workers and the measurably exposed workers. But the requirements of UNSCEAR go beyond this as well. We're looking for other industrial information. If we're talking about occupational exposures to miners, we might be interested in the amount of ore that's been mined, expressed in millions of megatons of ore. Or if it's in the power industry, we're looking at how much electricity is actually produced on an annual basis. I bring these latter two slides up just to give you an idea of the vast amount of information that survey is looking for and how daunting the challenge can be. So where does the data come from? Well, in some countries, you have a national dosimetry database. Unfortunately, in the US, we don't have such a database. In some cases, we might be looking at monitoring of workers to natural radiation sources like radon. Well, that doesn't occur in our country. We'd be interested if all of the workers are actually monitored. Well, in the US, that's a challenge because no, that's not the case. In fact, in some of the industries, unless a worker is going to receive greater than 10% of the occupational dose limit, there's no requirement for monitoring at all. Well, do we know the number of workers in each of these 48 sectors? Well, not really. We only have partial experience. So, what kind of response did we have to the UNSCEAR Global Survey? Well, as you can see for the 4 points above, it was a partial response. So, with a country as expansive as the US, where does our data come from? Well, it comes from a number of sources, many of them which are reports from various agencies and departments within the federal government. These are two examples of reports that are produced by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The one on the left, what we refer to as New Reg 0713, describes the occupational radiation exposure of commercial nuclear power reactors and other facilities. This particular volume was a compilation of data for the year 2018. And you can see this is actually the 51st annual report. This includes data on licensees that are either pressurized water reactors, boiling water reactors. We look at the actual fuel cycle from terms of conversion of the uranium, production of the fuel rods, operation of the plants, decommissioning of the plants, waste disposal, and transportation. In addition to this series of documents, we have its companion or sister document, where it's occupational radiation exposure at agreement state licensed materials facilities. And again, this is covering the period of 1997 to 2010. This would include many of the licensees that do not report directly to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, but they have to acquire data, hold that data. In some cases, they will voluntarily submit it to us. So we can put this report out as well. This is just a snapshot of what's in that annual report that the NRC produces. And you can see we look at a number of terms are defined. We actually look at the total effective dose distributions, and that we're collecting data for industrial radiography licensees, manufacturing distribution licensees to include nuclear pharmacies, low-level waste disposal licensees, ISFICs, independent spent fuel storage installation licensees. This is where our spent nuclear fuel is stored, fuel licensees, again, manufacturing, and our light water reactors. In addition to the NRC, we have other governmental reports, and this is an example that comes from the Department of Energy. This report analyzes the occupational radiation exposures, monitoring at DOE facilities. It includes occupational radiation exposure for all DOE employees, contractors, and subcontractors, as well as members of the public that enter into controlled areas. It compiles information for 101 DOE organizations at 35 federal sites. But we also have other organizations that we acquire information from. And this is an example of a report that is published by the National Council on Radiation Protection and Measurements. This report, report number 160, was actually published in 2007, and it superseded a previous report, report 93, that also covered the same type of information. And as you can see from this particular report, this is out of Chapter 7. We looked at occupational exposure and looked at collective dose for a number of sectors. As you might expect, one of the major sectors is the medical sector. That particular sector involves approximately 600,000 monitored medical workers in the United States. But an area that's very close to that is also civil aviation. There's approximately 180,000 pilots and aircrew that receive radiation exposures, and you can see they get a large proportion of the occupational exposure right there. Commercial nuclear power is only 8%. That was the information that's reported by the NRC. There are about 150,000 workers in that sector. We also see the government and DOE and medical. That's that DOE slice right there. That represents about 58,000 workers as well. So this is another source of information that we have available to us when we're responding to the survey. But there are other diverse sources that we can use. For example, Department of Labor, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, we have employment information, so we can find out how many workers there are in the sectors that are of interest to us. But more important, we can actually describe worker characteristics so that we can intercompare our workforce with other countries. The Department of Defense has a number of registries that are available to us as well. An example is the shipyard workers. Each of the shipyards do a lot of non-destructive testing, so there's a lot of industrial radiography information there. The military services also have their own hospital system. They have general hospitals as well as medical clinics that use radiation sources. And another registry that we have is what we refer to as Operation Tomodachi. This is a compilation of the approximately 75,000 DoD staff, their family members and contractors that were on the island of Honshu during the Fukushima accident. The Department of Transportation is also another source of information for us. The Bureau of Transportation Statistics actually highlights to us the number of pilots, the number of crew members, the hours that they're flying, the distances that they're flying. So we can use that for our ascertaining occupational exposure to that group. Second to last bullet here, the Nuclear Energy Agency and IAEA, the Information System on Occupational Exposure. Now, this is a database where our licensees are providing information such as work project information. Let's say the replacement of steam generator. There's information that our licensees are providing to NEA that they don't necessarily report to us. So we can go into that database to also augment our review. And as was mentioned by Michael and others, we look at peer-reviewed literature, where we have very detailed information on some sectors that we can refer to. So really the bottom line is you have to use whatever resource you have. A little information is better than none. We may have a 1,000-piece puzzle we're trying to assemble. We might only have 100 pieces, but we put the best picture together that we can. Now going forward, we'll also be responding to the public survey. And again, we'll use many of these same sources to pull together information. The Department of Transportation at the top, while they provided information for pilots and crews, they'll also provide information on civilians, the number of civilians flying, the distances, and the time in the air. The National Council on Radiation Protection and Measurements, they not only pulled information together on occupational exposure, but public exposure. For the NRC, we too collect information on effluents. We put out an annual report. It's a new reg contractor report, 2907. We actually have 23 volumes going back to the 1990s, and this is data that can be provided to the DARADA database. Department of Labor, again, we'll have some information there. Department of Energy, in their surveys that they have done, they've actually done overflight information, so we can have some information on the natural terrestrial radiation. And again, we'll have other sources like our Department of Interior, where the U.S. Geological Survey provides information on ground isotopes, whether it be potassium 40 in Florida to uranium concentrations in the Rocky Mountain states. Again, you have to use all of the sources available to you. So with that, I'd like to conclude and say thank you. We'll be available to answer any questions. And Madam Chairman, I turn the floor back to you.
Thank you very much, Vince, for a very comprehensive presentation, particularly on suggestions and pointing what sources of information could be helpful, not only for US, but also for other member states. With that, I would like to conclude this part of the side event and move to the final one, which is our panel discussion. And I would like to turn to our international organizations and our partners to this project, without whom we also would not be able to conduct a very comprehensive overview and try to avoid imposing burdens to member states. We invited, in chronological order, I'm going to invite the European Commission, the FAO, IAEA, and the WHO to say, share some views on how we could work together or also turn into the past. So with that, without spending much more time, I would like just to introduce Mr. Stefan Mundigel, team leader on radiation protection, the Directorate of DG Energy in the European Commission, Unit D3, Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety. Mr. Mundigel holds a PhD in theoretical physics. It has been working in the radiation protection domain for almost 30 years, covering various aspects, and represents the Commission in many international committees concerned with radiation protection. So, Stefan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mrs. Chair, Borislava. Thank you very much for inviting me here and giving me the opportunity to speak a bit about the situation in the European Union. Ladies and gentlemen, as you may know, the European Union is based on treaties which have been signed by all European Union members. And actually there are two treaties. One is the treaty establishing the European Atomic Energy Community, and the other one is the Treaty of Lisbon. And this first treaty on the European Atomic Energy Community contains a very important chapter on health and safety. This chapter empowers the European community and the European Commission to develop basic safety standards, which are in parallel to the international basic safety standards, with the difference that they are legally binding on European basic safety standards regulate the fuel that help protection of public workers and patients against the dangers arising from ionizing radiation. The Euratom Treaty also contains requirements on radioactivity in air, water, and soil, and the requirement means that member states, European Union member states, are obliged to continuously monitor the level of radioactivity in air, water, and soil. But what is much more interesting here for this panel is that member states need to communicate the results they have from the measurements periodically to the European Commission. So what the European Commission has made out of that are actually two databases. There is a database on radioactivity of environmental monitoring, REM database it's called, and the other one is RAD database, the radioactive discharges database. And so, as I said, the member states are obliged to regularly report, and the European Commission does publish these databases, so they are publicly accessible as soon as they are confirmed. There is another area where we, besides these obligations, try to get information on situations in Europe, and these are usually the dedicated studies which are published in our radiation series, and are also published in the radiation exposure of the European population, which has been published a couple of years ago, and it is available as RP 180. We have also tried to calculate doses to the population of the EU arising from the reported discharges I mentioned before, and there is a bit older report putting together the doses for the years 2004 to 2008, and that's the number RP 176. If you bear with me, I would have two more points. One has been published by our colleagues, the JRC, the Joint Research Center in ISPRA, and they have made a wonderful document which is called the European Atlas of Natural Radiation. So if you look to you, this is a huge book with information on natural. I try to show you to see it, and it is available online, but you can also get a printed copy if you send me an email. And therein you will find maps of Europe with information on cosmic radiation, on uranium, on thorium, on radon, and so on and so forth. The last point, Mrs. Chair, if you allow me, is something on occupational exposure, because I have heard that now from my previous speakers. The European Commission organized an exercise which is called ESOREX. And in this ESOREX, which is now independent from the Commission, you find interested European countries putting together their occupational exposure data, and they have their data for the different sectors, not only nuclear, but also the medical sector and the industrial sector, and also the natural radiation sources. And this ESOREX lives a bit by the voluntarily of the member states to populate this data the database, but this is also online available and publicly available. With this, Mrs. Chair, thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to answer questions if there are some. And apologies that I didn't present the slides here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Very comprehensive and focused input, and you helped us catching up a little bit of the time. We have been a little bit behind, but I think we are still managing very well. I just also want to clarify that I'm introducing the international organizations in alphabetical order as well, and would like to encourage you to post questions again in the QA box. We have 10 more minutes to before we start the QA session. So without further delay, I would like to introduce Carl Blackburn, who is representing the FAO. So Carl is irradiation and food radiological safety specialist at the Food and Environmental Protection section of the joint FAO-IA division of nuclear techniques. in Food and Agriculture of the Department of Nuclear Science and Application. So with that introduction, Carl, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and what a nice question to ask. So first of all, thank you for inviting the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations to this, to be a member of this panel. And really the answer to the question that you pose, what can we bring, is really in the name of the organization, food. Food is quite key to the public exposure assessment because it's one of the fundamental things. It's a fundamental pathway for radioactivity to enter the body and therefore affect us. And really what we bring to the party is that we have expertise in this area. Primarily things like consumption rate data. There's a joint FAO-WHO database called GIFT, the Global Individual Food Consumption Tool. This can be helpful for deriving consumption rates for how much food's eaten. I myself also intimately involved in some work on radioactivity in food. Joe from the IAEA mentioned earlier that there is some work ongoing between FAO, IAEA and WHO looking at radioactivity in food. The levels that we find out there for naturals, as well as some idea about how we can have standards on human-made radionuclides. But in terms of UNSCEAR, I think really it's data and facilitating. If you need an expert who's an expert in any area in the food field or agriculture, fisheries, or even forestries, then please, if I can't help you myself, I'm sure that I have access to my experts and colleagues in the FAA who can help you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carl. And again, we're inviting any questions that you might have for Carl, who is going to answer at the end. I know that Joe already had made a presentation and presented how IAEA could contribute to this project, and I would then pass the floor to the WHO, to Emily van den Venter, and again, apologies if I misspell it. So Emily is the head of the Radiation and Health Unit of the Department of Environment, Climate Change and Health of the World Health Organization. She's the team leader for the World Health Organization Radiation Program, and also she holds a PhD in electrical engineering and more than 20 years of experience in radiation sector. Emily, you have the floor.
Thank you, Borislava. And thank you for the invitation to contribute to today's side event of UNSCEAR and more generally to this very useful project. As mentioned in the opening presentation that you gave, WHO is participating in an observer role. And to explain to you a little bit why we are participating, then I can just mention that WHO, through its structure and mandate, can contribute to this project. Obviously, WHO is the UN agency dealing with health and public health, and we have 194 member states in 6 regional offices that are in contact with these ministries of health of all the countries in their region. So we also have 150 country offices, mostly in low and middle income countries. And these countries' offices are based in the countries and can have direct contact with the government. So through these mechanisms, we could be hopefully helping UNSCEAR to find the NCPs in some of the more remote countries. Also, in terms of data collection, WHO's has 6 core functions, one of which is to monitor the health situation and assess the health trends in countries. And of course, to do this from a radiation perspective, we need exposure data. And so this project is of interest and important to us as well. In terms of data collection at WHO, we are very involved in data collection, partly because of the Sustainable Development Goals. These are to be achieved by 2030 by all the member states with the help from the relevant UN agencies. And so in particular for Sustainable Development Goal number 3, focused on health and well-being, we are emphasizing data collection as part of our current program of work. And so we have a critical role to support the member states in the effective collection, analysis and reporting and use of national and subnational disaggregated data so that the countries can develop and monitor policies and plans. So there again, we see a strong emphasis on data collection, and that could be helpful in this project. In terms of our activities relating to radioactivity and public exposures, of course, WHO is a co-sponsor of the International Basic Safety Standards, and as such is very much involved in its implementation at country level. In regards to activities concerning public exposure to radioactivity, we really work mostly on radon and on radioactivity in drinking water and food. And of course, as you know, together with FAO, we work on Codex Alimentarius. An example of cooperation is in the topic of radon, whose exposure represents a well-recognized risk of lung cancer. And so recently we ran a survey on radon through our regional offices, and this has provided very useful information regarding the existence of national surveys, of radon action plans, of policies, regulation, but also exposure levels. And this we would be very happy to share through this UNSCEAR project. And we display a lot of our data on our web platform called the Global Health Observatory, and this is where our radon data will sit. Just to end, in terms of our relationship with UNSCEAR, we are very happy to share information, especially in the context of the UN bodies. And we are actually very much encouraged to cooperate, not the least because that would minimize the number of surveys that member states have to respond to, and to avoid, of course, duplication in the collection of statistical information. And we have been working with UNSCEAR for several years now, in particular on a parallel activity related to medical exposures. And in that project, several joint advocacy activities were done for the purpose of raising awareness of UN and WHO member states on the importance of collection and provision of data. So likewise, we very much hope to be able to support UNSCEAR regarding public exposures, on the one hand from a technical perspective by sharing relevant data, and on the other hand in reaching out through our health networks to maximize the number of participating countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily. I think we have received a very comprehensive picture how the different organizations could contribute and work with UNSCEAR on this project. So now it comes time that we can just go to the QA part and address the questions that we have collected through the QA box. Let me just start with the first one, and I'm going to read them to you because I understand that you don't see them. So the first one is really to wrap up the previous presentations. Is there anything that, especially the international organizations, that they would like to add, or what specific programs or databases for data collection you have and you could share? For we understood the DIRATA. For the WHO, Emily mentioned the survey on radon, but are there more stable databases or continuing databases that they're used, or do you provide guidance to member states to provide that such information in a more regular and sustainable manner? Maybe if I can ask Carl, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. It's a good question, okay? And really, what's nice in this area is a good degree of collaboration, because in this area there are different mandates that overlap somewhat. So for the Food and Agriculture Organization, obviously we're interested in food, agricultural production, etc., etc. And so we're interested in nutrition and food safety as all part of this. And this overlaps really with the public health mandate, the World Health Organization. And in this area also with the International Atomic Energy Agency, who have a mandate for radiation safety. So I say that we don't have a special program really at looking at the data collection on public exposure per se in ionizing radiation. But I think I hope in my last answer I helped you by saying that we work with others, with these, especially these two other organizations in their programs. So it's really kind of a supporting role and providing expertise. I noticed in Joe's, maybe Joe would like to say more, because I noticed in Joe's presentation she had a lot to say about some of the databases and things that she needed, that she produced as part of the IEA program. I hope that's sufficient, Madam Chair, and maybe Joe, would you like to take over from that?
Thank you, Carl and Madam Chair. Yeah, I think I'd just like to echo what Carl was saying, is that we are working closely between and within the IEA and with FAO and others to try and make best use of data collections to support our various mandates. As we mentioned this morning, the Durata database on discharges is something that the IEA is very much committed to updating and maintaining on behalf of member states and to support UNSCEAR. We collect quite a lot of information on concentrations and levels of radionuclides in the environment, which we use to support our models and assessment methodologies for calculating public exposures and to support member states in doing that. I'm not aware of any specific database that actually collects public exposures data, but we do at times do reviews of the published literature and reports from member states, so that we can understand, for example, like I mentioned this morning, what the doses to the public are from the diet, overall radionuclides. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There was a question for Jing related to medical exposure from Helena Janzekovic. So, Jing Cheng, thank you for the presentation. I'm just reading it out. In some countries, a lot of patients who are exposed in medical facilities are coming from other countries. Is this issue in a way addressed in the UNSCEAR questionnaire when collecting medical dose data? Thank you.
I doubt I can answer this question accurately. I would ask Farid, maybe, yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And now I need to read it. See. Can you go up, please? Yeah, I see the point. Through the survey, we were not able to identify the duplications or the exposure among other countries. Yeah. So this is more the question of neighboring countries. Through the survey itself, it was not possible to identify such information, but through the literature review, so we found some publications, and I don't want to mention countries, but it's well explained in the literature. There are some tourism of medical exposure, people going to one country, getting some surgery or some treatments there and get also exposure. And this is reflected, let's say, in a shorter way in the literature review, but not through the survey.
Thank you very much. And again, if you have follow-up questions, please send it to us on unscare@un.org and we will respond to that. There was a question for Lydia. Can you please elaborate more about your experience on data collection about NORM in Brazil? What kind of difficulties did you face in collecting data and how did you manage them? Lydia?
Thank you for the question. But I think that the problem, the most typical problem is the big country that we have and differences between regions. This is the most difficult thing to address. We have to do some projects, special projects to one region or other region. We are doing it. but it's not entirely, we don't have now the entire information for all regions from the country. Thank you, Borislava. I think I answered the question.
We have two questions, if I may ask Vince to respond, if maybe with the support of Farid, related to the occupational exposure. And the first one is from Safa Murad, who asks, should radiation workers with continuous results of less than minimum detectable limit for a period of more than 5 years be still included in the occupational monitoring program? Can we just stop providing them with personal dosimeters? I think it's not exactly for UNSCEAR, but I thought, no, this is the first question. And then maybe the other one, which is more relevant for us, is could NRC also use the early data on occupational exposure in MPPs provided to the ISOE database? Vince, if you wish, I can read both again.
Oh, no, that's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Let me start with the latter question first regarding ISOE. The data on monitored workers for the light water reactors that is submitted to ISOE is from the same contractor that prepares our annual report, NUREG 0713. However, as I had mentioned in my presentation, the utilities voluntarily submit additional information on a voluntary basis. In particular, job doses that are in there. We actually look at that. In the occupational report, we actually have an Excel spreadsheet that looks at occupational exposure, and much of that data is from ISOE. Let me also say, as one of the advisors to the group looking at occupational exposure, the ISOE database is a very valuable source of information for us. In particular, prior to 2016, we had virtually no information on decommissioning of power plants. And the information that had been voluntarily submitted by various utilities was fundamental in our preparing the first analysis of worker exposure for this particular activity. So it's a valuable source of information. The scientific committee is very much aware of the presence of that information, and it's actively used for data mining, if you will. With regard to monitoring occupational workers, as I say, in the US, if a worker is not going to receive greater or will receive less than 10% of our occupational dose limit, in our case, 5 millisievert, there is no requirement to badge that worker. Now, many of the licensees voluntarily badge all of their workers to have documentation on what those workers receive, primarily for legal purposes, so that over a course of 5 or 10 or 15 years, if that individual develops some sort of health effect, we have documentation on what their occupational exposures were, whether it be radiation sources, chemical sources, other occupational health issues. So really, it's a decision of the licensee to badge those particular workers and monitor the radiation exposure over their career. So, Madam Chair, I think that might answer the question.
Thank you very much, Vince. And I'm mindful of the time we had. So we have one more general, but I think very relevant question that links to Jamila's presentation. And this is about collecting data not only from governmental organizations, but also private and non-governmental organizations. So I would like to invite all the panelists, I don't know who would like to start first, of how do you organize the collection of data from multiple organizations, from multiple sources of information, particularly for non-governmental sources? Carl, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Very good question, actually. And then specifically, you mentioned the Red Cross. There are a few things where we get together, lots of people interested in this area of exposure, radiation, radiation safety. There's an interagency committee on radiation safety with a technical community, and we rely on all the different people who come together, including the UNSCEAR Secretariat, I think, come to this committee meeting. And there we have all our contacts, all our stakeholders. So I know that for Red Cross, they're sometimes involved through people like the World Health Organization. And so we do have lines into these things. But for me, it's interesting because, you know, on the food side, it can be quite difficult. So we work quite hard in different fora. For example, I go to the Codex Alimentarius Commission, which is the big food standard setting organization for the world, and talk to the heads of the food safety organizations, and to get feedback from those people. And also in this forum, we have many different people from the food industry and from food producers who come and also want to put input, and they may have specific questions or specific areas of interest. For instance, one meeting, I had a long meeting about natural mineral waters, and natural mineral waters some of these can contain enhanced levels of radionuclides. So it's really through our contacts, I think. Certainly, speaking as the FAO, it's through our contacts, it's through our liaison to some of these very important committees that we're all a part of, and we keep. These committees have part of their function is to swap information and to try and find some of these non-governmental yet still important organisations that we can liaison. That's my take on it, Madam Chair. I don't know if you'd like to add further, but I hope that helps shed some light on the question.
Yes, Farid, please.
I can just add one important thing, and I think the presentation from Vince showed how important it is on national level to coordinate with non-governmental organizations or with institutes or with research facilities. And then at the end, UNSCEAR only takes, let's say, the formal submitted data. So there is some, let's say, ways on the country level. And then on the international level, for sure, we are also cooperating with other organizations which are not part of this forum now, but we also take from them the information, especially if they're published as a report or available online. Thank you.
As Carl mentioned WHO, I was just wondering whether, Emily, you could share your experience. You've mentioned that you have 150 country offices, but if you can maybe elaborate how you collect information from private organizations or Red Cross. Yes, it was mentioned particularly. Red Cross was mentioned by one of our participants. Thank you.
Yeah, with respect to medical exposures, yeah, we do take information also through professional associations, but in general, any information that we would publish, for example, on the Global Health Observatory that I mentioned, they would have to come from the member states themselves. So these are official data. With respect to public exposures, we only get information from official data. So like Farid said, it may be that at the country level, they would be able to share information with researcher, academia, and foundation and NGOs. But from a WHO perspective, my understanding is that we only pick up information. I mean, we publish information from official sources.
Thank you very much, Emily. And before I close this session, I'd like just to give a moment to Joe to respond to the question about minimum detectable limits.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We've had a comment on the Q&A from a member of staff in the Division of Waste Safety and Radiation, and he has said that the IEA General Safety Guide 7 explicitly states that if the dose is less than the MDL, it should be recorded as 0. So I apologize, I can't remember who asked the question, but maybe it would be a good idea if you were interested in the IEA guidance on this topic to look at the IEA General Safety Guide 7. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe. And this brings us to the end of our side event. And again, I would like to thank many participants who followed us. Our initial indication is that between the morning and afternoon session, we had between 217 and 230 followers and participants, which really shows a very good level of participation and interest in the UNSCEAR work. And on behalf of Peter Johnson, who unfortunately had other commitments, I would like just to thank you all, our panelists, our presenters, and all of you for your time to listen, participate, and ask questions. We are going to take notes, and we have already taken notes, and we're going to reflect and improve our guidance to member states, NCPs, so to facilitate the future public, but also medical and occupational exposure. I would like to recall that we are still waiting, and we want to encourage about 100 member states to still nominate national contact persons. If you have any questions on this survey or any other UNSCEAR work, please send us an email on the unscare@un.org. I think it was, for me, and I hope really for you, was a very useful, productive, informative event. And I would wish you all the best, stay safe, and a very nice weekend. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye to everybody. Bye-bye.